Cheese is a subject near and dear to my heart. My first job after culinary school was working as a prep cook at the legendary cheese shop Fromage Kitchen in Cambridge. And let me tell you, it was an incredibly formative experience. And by formative, I mean I was in a constant state of panic. But I learned so much about cooking and grit and truly artisanal products, and I fell deeper in love with food. I never would have been able to hack it as a cheesemonger, you guys. I am way too anxious and distractible. But I did get a glimpse into the extraordinary world of cheese making and cheese pairing, and I came to appreciate cheese in a whole new way. So whether you are a full-blown curd nerd or totally intimidated by a fancy cheese counter, you're going to leave this episode with some new knowledge and really fun ideas for eating and learning about the great cheeses of the world.
This could happen to you. This could happen to you. This could happen to you.
My guest today is Tenaya Darlington, aka Madame Fromage. She's an author, a content creator, a cheese expert and educator, like a PhD holding English professor kind of educator who just also happens to teach us about stinky cheese on social media. She's written books about cheese and cocktails, and she's the kind of lady who throws a blue cheese and Black Sabbath party because what goes better with blue cheese than heavy metal? What I'm saying is she is a wealth of knowledge and a ton of fun, and we're going to leave this episode wanting to dash to the cheese shop and start tasting. So let's chat with Tenaya. I wanted to take a moment to tell you about the Not From Concentrate newsletter on Substack. Subscribe for free to stay up to date on new episodes and get access to giveaways and bonus content. I also want to give a special shout out to my paid subscribers who get new, wildly delicious and distraction-proof recipes delivered to their inboxes every month, as well as essays and tips for cooking with a busy brain. Plus, paid subscribers get access to my full recipe archive. Head to catherinesmart.com to become a free or paid subscriber, and thank you for supporting the show. Tenaya Darlington, welcome to Not From Concentrate.
Hey, Catherine. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm so excited to have you here. So we were introduced through my wonderful producer, Allie Miller, who was a student of yours. And she said she knows that I love cheese. My first food job when I was in grad school was at Formaggio Kitchen in Cambridge.
Oh, no kidding.
So I was thrown right into the fire. And she said, you know, I have this phenomenal professor who knows all about cheese, Madame Fromage. And I think I had been following you, but hadn't quite made the connection. So I was thrilled that you were able to take time to come on. And I'm so excited to hear about your adventures in cheese. But let's just start with a little bit of background. How does someone go from teaching English to being a cheese educator and traveling the world and bringing us on cheese adventures?
I mean, I really didn't see it coming. It's a whole life I never imagined for myself, which is kind of the best. I think, Catherine, like you, I came into the world of food through journalism. I worked at a community newspaper in Wisconsin in my early 20s, and it was sort of the beginning of the artisan cheese movement in the United States. And I can remember a woman chef saying, Tenaya, in your food career, keep an eye on cheese. It's about to get really interesting. A few years later, the paper started having trouble. I just decided, okay, I'm gonna switch careers. I became a English professor teaching writing at a university in Philadelphia. And once I started teaching, although I love being in a classroom, I really missed writing about food. I had been a food editor. And wouldn't you know, I had a graduate student my first year who was blogging. And she was really talented. And when I told her, you should pitch Food and Wine, Savoir, all these magazines, she said, I have no interest, Tenaya. I don't want to live in print. I live online. And she said, I have this blog and I love it. And all I want to do is work digitally. And I remember thinking like, oh, how do I steer this poor student out of this like digital swamp she's in? She's never going to earn a living there. And Somehow she convinced me that I should start a blog to understand the platform and that this was really the future of writing. And Catherine, I resisted until one weekend. I thought, you know what? She wasn't the first student to talk about loving blogging. And whenever a student is interested in writing, I'm just like, tell me more. I am so thrilled to hear about their journey and how they found their way into it and what's gratifying. So I decided to experiment with a blog, and I thought, what the heck? I miss Wisconsin. I'm going to do a cheese blog. It's just a way to kind of chronicle some interesting cheeses that I'm trying at my local cheese shop in Philadelphia. And I called it Madame Fromage as kind of a joke because honestly, I did not want to put my name on a cheese blog. I'm a professional writer. I used to get paid to, write on a weekly basis. I'm not putting up free stuff on the internet and like attaching my name to it. That seems ridiculous. It was life-changing because I started writing about cheeses, taking pictures of them. I mean, my pictures were terrible, but the writing was good. And I was really detailed about what I was tasting. And the cheesemongers would suggest beer pairings, gin pairings. I would studiously come home and try them, type up my notes, put them out there on Madame Fromage. And within a few months, I started getting these comments. And one night I got a comment from a cheesemaker in Northern Scotland. He made a great cheese called Strathton Blue. And he said, Madame Fromage, I just Googled myself and I found that you have written about my cheese. My wife and I would like to invite you to come visit us on the North Sea. Catherine, it blew my mind. I thought, you are kidding me. In the world of print, you have no connection to readers unless, they write into the newspaper, and it's usually a complaint. But here was a cheesemaker who was so honored to be online. And suddenly I saw the value of a blog. So it really just went from there. It went from that conversation to then talking to cheesemongers. The cheese shop where I did all my cheese buying brought me in to teach a blogging class. I started doing signage for their cheese cases and tastings, and eventually ended up at a party with an editor who said, I hear you're the cheese lady of Philadelphia. Why aren't you writing a book with me? And so my first book was called The DeBrin Brothers House of Cheese, and it was with the cheese shop in Philadelphia that had really inspired me to write this whole blog. So it was just a chance happening. Now I'm like 2 cheese books in, living in France and truly living a dream life surrounded by a cheese community that I just love. So couldn't have seen it coming.
And your third book, I'm sorry, I only knew about Adventures in Cheese. I didn't even know about the first cheese book.
I did a first cheese book and then I took a little break and my brother and I wrote a series of books on cocktails. So my whole life has been like cheese and booze for the past 15 years. So kind of a random, foray into the world of spirits as well. But yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride. Before the cheese book, I had done a poetry collection and a novel and really decided that I wasn't sure I was that kind of writer. Working at a newspaper, writing about people, starting to write about food made me realize I didn't want to just be in my head all the time. I wanted to write about people and flavors, and I loved interviewing people. And when I went to writing conferences for creative writers, I often found that it was very businessy and backstabby, and that cheese conferences were fun and delicious and all about farming. And there were these farmers that would come in and just cut loose with these wild cheeses they'd be pulling out of their backpacks. And I just realized these are my people. This is my community. So it's been a very, very happy discovery.
I think a lot of people might go to a party and they see a beautiful cheese board and, they love to eat it, but they would be totally intimidated to make one themselves. That's a question I get a lot. I had a cheese board I brought to a party recently, and there was definitely some curiosity, but also intimidation. And I think for those outside of cheese, if you're lucky enough to be able to visit a cheese shop, I think it can be very intimidating. I'm still intimidated by the mongers, and I worked at Formaggio Kitchen. So I would love to give folks a little bit of a pep talk and kind of some advice of when you go up to a cheese counter at a well-stocked grocery store, or even better, a small cheese shop, what are we asking the mongers? How are we setting ourselves up to really find the cheeses that we want to be bringing and sharing with our guests?
Such a good question. I think a cheese case is really overwhelming. And it's normal to not know what you're looking at. I feel like it's only now, like a decade and a half in, that I'll go into a great cheese shop and I'll be looking for something I don't recognize because I've just spent so much time around cheese cases. But it wasn't like that originally. And someone once gave me a tip. It was a cheesemonger who said, you should always come in and ask us what we're eating, because whatever I took home last night for my girlfriend or for my family is going to be the best thing that we have right now, or something really new and interesting and seasonal. So now my question is always like, okay, like what are you loving right now? Or what did you take home last night? And I really try to have a conversation with the cheesemonger. I think sometimes people don't realize that the person behind a cheese counter, just like someone working at a wine shop, really is passionate about the thing that they're selling, and they know so much, and they're there to guide you and help you create an interesting pairing or put together a cheese board. So work with that person and don't be afraid to say, hey, I really don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm going to serve some mean Manhattans tonight and I want to put out a little cheese board. Or I'm having my in-laws over for the first time. I don't know what they like. Can you give me some guidance on a cheese board that would be good for everybody? Or I have some total cheese snobs coming over tonight, and like, how can we impress? So, my first bit of advice is always like, talk to your cheesemonger. They will be so delighted to help you.
There's no way you're not a cheese nerd if you are working at a cheese store. Like, you are waiting for the moment. It's not because anybody is getting rich rewrapping cheese every day. There has to be passion behind it. It's a very special group of people.
And the cheesemongers will tell me, people always come in and they'll just say, I want a bold cheese, or I'm looking for a Gouda. They'll just start with what they know instead of saying like, I have a really nice red wine tonight. Or like, hey, I just picked up some really fine kombucha and I want to put out a couple of cheeses for dinner. Like, talk about what else is happening on your table. And then the monger will be able to direct you to some things that will match stuff that you already know well. But if you are just going to the shop and maybe it's a shop, there isn't anybody behind the counter, is kind of busy, I always say, like, start with a cheese but look for a variation. So maybe you love cheddar. So in this case, look for a cheddar that's from a place you've never gotten a cheddar before, like New Zealand, or get one that's extra age, or maybe it's wrapped in cloth. It just looks a little different. Like, you're going to like it because it's a comfort cheese, but you're going a little bit out of the zone to try something new. And then after your comfort cheese, I always say, look for a conversation piece. Now, next, go for that cheese that is kind of making googly eyes at you, or that looks kind of wild. Maybe it's wrapped in a leaf, maybe it's wrapped in bark. Because there's nothing better than like a little dinner party where there's a cheese on the table that everybody wants to taste and everyone wants to talk about. Well, then whatever they've brought to the table, their bad day or their grumpy self, like, it's going to disappear because they're going to want to talk about this cheese. So a conversation piece cheese, I always say, is one that you don't know, but you want to get to know and you want everybody to meet. And the last thing I always say is go for a cheese that is close, like physically close. Like, what is the closest cheese that is made to your house or to your city or to your region? So get to know your local cheese community. And if you do those three things, a comfort cheese, a conversation piece, and a cheese that's close or from your inner world, I think that that's a really, really lovely board. It gives you something familiar, something totally fresh, and then it also connects you to what's regional or seasonal.
I love that you took the sort of traditional thing, which is go for 3 different milks. I'm always like, okay, give me a sheep, give me a goat, give me a cow, which I think I want to talk about that too. But I love that you're going to a use case and a feeling instead of like a comfort cheese, a conversation piece. So say we are going to go stay in those 3 realms of the comfort and the conversation and the closeness. Now let's get into sort of the milks and the aging. I know it's hard to do this without delicious cheese snacks in front of us, but let's do a little 101. Can we talk about different kinds of milks maybe to start, and how we might be thinking about that when we walk up to the cheese counter?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, you're right. And you've worked in cheese, so you know that there's like the standard line of get cheeses of different milk types or different textures. It's a really great basic place to start. But I think after a while, it's like you can only make so many goat, cow, sheep boards, and you start to just see the same, goat and sheep cheeses all the time. And it can be a lot more interesting to kind of either do a mix around some like curiosity, or to like eat 3 cheddars all at once, or eat 3 alpines all at once, or 3 blues, what have you. So I'm always saying, like, create a board where you're actually going to educate yourself about something. Don't just like fill in boxes. Don't just check off boxes. But I think exploring the milks, and sometimes exploring the milks exclusively, like an all goat board, an all sheep board, can be really, really interesting because the milks are so distinct. I mean, you mostly see cow's milk cheeses, especially in the United States, because we just have so many cows. But I think one thing to know is that your other milks have, like, especially in terms of pairings, different things that they can bring to the table. For example, your sheep's milk, which is the richest of the milks, and I'm talking like your manchegos or your Idiazabals, these really kind of dense sheepy cheeses. Your pecorino is in there as well. These are often mild cheeses that play really well with spicy things on the board or with red wine because sheep's milk can stand up to tannins. That's just because it's really rich, meaning really fatty, good fats. So I always say, when in doubt, sheep's milk, sheep's milk, sheep's milk, especially if you're going to a party, you don't know what's going to be on the table. You want to bring something to a wine lover or a whiskey lover because whiskey, also great with sheep's milk. Scotch, gin, great with sheep's milk. That's because it's mellow and herbaceous. It's like the friend that you can bring to any scenario and they're going to light up the room. If you're someone who has maybe some digestive issues or you want something that's a bit lighter, your goat's milk is the least rich of the milks, easiest to digest. So nice just on a very casual board with like celery and radishes and carrots, or to bring a little bit of tang and tartness to a board. I love kombucha and I love pairing goat cheeses and kombucha together because I really like tart flavors. And so sometimes I'll make an all-goat board and serve tart things like a lemon curd, a cherry jam, quince paste, kombucha. And to me, that's like an exciting thing for the palate to explore sour or brightness with people.
They can be so beautiful too. I mean, goat's milk come in so many covered in ash or in a log or in like a little shape. And I remember being really surprised. I always thought of goat cheese was just like that really tangy plastic wrapped log from the grocery store. And it was such a revelation to see, depending on the age and the style, how many different types of goat's milk cheeses there are.
Agreed. I think in the States, people always tell me I actually don't like goat cheese. They'll come up and be like, I'm a cheese lover, but the only thing I don't like is goat cheese. And I'll always say, it's probably because you ate a shrink wrapped goat log. The other thing people tend not to like is blue cheese because they've just eaten blue cheese crumbles out of a plastic container. And when you are able to access more high quality cheeses or fresh cheeses, or you travel and you start to explore these cheeses, you realize, oh, like you said, Catherine, goat cheeses can be a revelation, subtle and sensual and just so interesting. A balanced goat cheese, like a beautiful French goat cheese, is incredible. But it's not what we often find at, say, a supermarket.
Yeah, I wanted to back up because what you just said about travel, I think is so important. I often talk about, in my writing, I talk about distraction, attention a lot, and ADHD, and how this idea of you have to spark curiosity and in order to really get a deep interest in something. And I think cheese is one of those things that can seem really complicated and maybe sort of, again, intimidating. But when you go down to the level of a farmer on a farm with their goats or their cows, it's so much more elemental. And if you're lucky enough to get to visit those places, I think that can inspire the love and appreciation as much as the actual cheese. I know you have had the opportunity to do a lot of traveling and bring travelers with them. For someone who may be curious about exploring, visiting a cheesemaker or figuring out a way to sort of dip their toe in, how do we get started? How could someone interact with a cheesemaker and maybe be introduced to this world?
I always say, number one, go to your local farmer's market and cozy up to your local cheesemaker. They have worked on a farm probably all week, and this is their social occasion. Tell them you're curious about cheese. Tell them you're a budding curd nerd. See if they maybe have an open house weekend coming up or a farm store. Often I'll hear from people who say, I want to introduce my kids to cheese. We want to see some animals. And I would say, just go to the farmer's market and talk to your local farmer. Chances are they will be delighted to have a deep conversation with you. And they'll be thrilled if there are kids that come and express curiosity. So that, I think, is the easiest way. Another way is to see if in your state there is a state cheese guild. For example, in Pennsylvania, there's a cheese guild. There's a New York cheese guild, especially up in the Finger Lakes. a California cheese trail, a Vermont cheese trail. And those are ways where you can, say, take a little road trip and make a couple of stops to visit cheesemakers. And they're really there, hoping to welcome curious customers. So that's another way. And then I would say more recently, say in the last decade, cheese travel has actually become pretty popular. And there are a few different companies. I work for the very first one called Cheese Journeys, where we take people on these backdoor experiences throughout Europe to learn about incredible artisan cheese. So if you become a real curd nerd, or you're someone who feels like, you know what, I want to have a travel adventure like that, look me up.
I would love to do that. That's amazing. I was lucky to do a little bit of the Vermont cheese trail with Isan Girdle from Formaggio Kitchen. He taught a wine and cheese class. Maybe it was just called like a cheese class. I went to Boston University and was in their gastronomy program.
Yes, I heard you talk about that in one of your early podcasts. Fantastic.
Yeah. So they did this cheese class and we would eat a pound of cheese per class. Like we didn't realize it at the time because it was these tiny tastes, but ate so much cheese and then got to go on this cheese trail. But this is back in like 2008. And it's so cool to see how this has evolved in travel and tourism and just a way for small farmers and cheesemakers to support themselves. Could you talk a little bit about if someone were to join you on one of these travels, what is that experience like? What can they expect?
One of the things that's really cool about doing something like a dedicated cheese journey is we have relationships with the cheesemakers. And for example, we do a tour in France, kind of on the France-Swiss border. It's in the Savoie and Jura region of France. And one of the amazing things that we do is we get up early and we go up into the French Alps and we see cheese making over an open fire. So without electricity in an alpage cheese making hut. And for most Americans, this is the first time they've ever seen like milk come in from a barn, go into a vat, get heated, culture, bacterial culture, which looks like yogurt, goes into the milk. It separates the curds, come up out of the way. The cheesemaker draws up the curds out of this huge copper cauldron in a big net cloth and carries them over to a cheese form on the other side of the room and makes one wheel of this cheese per day. So it's the most basic form of production in this really traditional old way. So that's one of the amazing things that I think you get to see on something like a cheese journey. Another is that you get to go behind the scenes in cheese caves where usually nobody other than cave experts can go because these are environments where you need special booties covering your feet and you need a hairnet and a beard net if you have one. So giving people access to learn about the art of cheese aging in some really unusual cheese cellars is another thing that somebody can see on a cheese journey. For example, we go to the caves of Marcel Petit in the Jura region of France, where Comté is aged 100,000 wheels, and they call this the Comté Cathedral. Go in, there's 100,000 wheels of the same cheese, and they're organized by elevation and by producer. So you can literally look up a wall and see the cheeses that have been made at different elevations of a particular Alp. Things like that are just mind-blowing. You don't realize, I think, as a consumer, the care and craftsmanship that goes into aging really great cheese. And nobody comes away from one of these experiences without a new appreciation for cheese making and an understanding of why cheeses, especially aged cheeses, can be kind of expensive at times. And also, then there are just wonderful pairings with all sorts of local products. So you get to try, cassis and cheese in Burgundy, or you go up into Northern Italy and you're trying amazing Barolos with their exquisite taleggio's and stuff like that. So you get to try the cheeses of the region with the regional specialties. And it's really an aha moment for so many people who travel with us.
Well, you have a really interesting background because of your expertise in both cocktails and sort of pairings as well as cheese. I know there are so many wonderful options, but maybe could we give, say, 3 pairings that folks we think would be able to find locally a cheese and either a cider or a cocktail or a kombucha, but maybe 3 interesting pairings that if people are craving cheese after this episode, they could go try for themselves?
Absolutely. One of my favorite pairings, I'm just going to think first thing comes to mind is like late breakfast. This is a non-alcoholic pairing. And it's just a fresh goat cheese and a cup of sencha green tea, which just tastes like pure spring grass. And I think when you have just fresh goat cheese, which tastes so grassy and light and just like fresh sunlight, and then you have this fresh, grassy, warm cup of sencha tea, that is an incredible pairing. I teach that one pretty often. I love to do cheese and tea together. I also think having a warm beverage with cheese, it just softens the cheese as it's in your mouth. And it's this revelation that, yeah, you don't have to have a cold beverage. You don't even have to have alcohol. And you can have this beautiful marriage of kind of like vegetation. So that's always one that I say, if you want to have some fun with the next level pairing, try sencha green tea and a lovely fresh goat cheese. The next one, which is going now the opposite direction, let's say it's, happy hour. I love a dirty martini and just a nice big shard of pecorino.
Oh.
In both of those things, you get some salinity, some saltiness. So I love the briny, salty edge of a dirty martini, a gin martini, one that's got like a lot of herbaceous nuts is what I like. And you could do like martini too. And then a pecorino. It could be a pecorino Toscana, which is on the sweet side, or it could be, a Sicilian pecorino, which is maybe a little bit more sharp and intense. But the bracingness of a cold martini with the salty, sharp crystallization of a pecorino is just beautiful together. And then another combination that I really loved, and this comes from one of the cheese tours that we do to Northern Italy. We visit an affineur of Parmigiano Reggiano, so someone who ages Parmigiano Reggianos for years. And when he goes through and he tries his Parmigiano Reggiano, Giorgio Cravero sips prosecco between tastings. And I think a lot of people don't think of Parmigiano Reggiano as like a cheese you would just sit around and eat. You think of it as a grating cheese for pasta or salad. But a beautiful piece of Parmigiano Reggiano, as you know, Catherine, it's exquisite. It's fruity. It can almost have notes like pineapple. And then you pair it with sparkling prosecco, which is like a little bit yeasty and just refreshing, and maybe it has some honey notes. It just rounds the edges of that sharp, salty, sweet piece of Parmigiano Reggiano. So I love when people are coming over to like put out a hunk of Parmigiano Reggiano and, big kind of like pointy cheese knife, let people break off chunks and then stand around the kitchen and nibble it while sipping some sparkling wine. To me, that is glorious.
Absolutely divine. That sounds phenomenal. So you are so plugged into the cheese world, both, the European cheese world, the cheese world here over in the United States. As you're talking about these caves and these really traditional old methods, what is the state of things? Like, do we worry that these traditions won't be carried on, or is there a vibrant, dedicated group of younger folks taking over? That's something I think about a lot, especially with some of these older, more traditional cheeses. What does our future of cheese look like?
It's something that I'm often trying to wrap my mind around too, because I think it's a little bit of both. On the one hand, you have these traditions that are dying out. Like your average Alpine family is not wanting to stand over a hot cauldron and make traditional cheeses anymore. Like there just are not as many like mountain cheesemakers as there once were, so there's this Alpine tradition that I think like countries like Switzerland and France and Italy are frantically trying to save. On the other hand, as those families are starting to dwindle, I think you do have a rising interest, and a lot of it is coming from curious travelers, people who are more curious than ever to know where their food comes from, and even from millennials who have a lot of curiosity about quality foods. And so you have more people than ever wanting to learn about these cheeses, about these rare cheeses, and even beginning to understand that cheeses can go extinct just like a bird or an insect can. And so, when I'm doing these tours, sometimes we're eating cheeses that like one person makes. And you realize like, oh my gosh, at one point, there were thousands of people making this cheese. And now there's like one family left. So you realize that these are really kind of these national treasures. And I think the European community has become really good and very artful at marketing that and starting to get this into places like TikTok and Instagram, where they're really trying to revive interest in these traditions. On the other hand, you also have like this artisan cheese making culture in the United States that has sprung up in the last 30 to 40 years, where cheesemakers have now come over to Europe and they've started learning these traditions, then taking them back to the US and then doing modifications to create their own unique interpretations of things like brie and Gouda and Gruyere, right? So what you get back in the United States is kind of like this interesting riff. And to me, that is positive evolution in the world of cheese. So I think there are a lot of things that are, there are a lot of reasons to be very excited about the world of cheese. I think things like tariffs are making it terribly difficult. Inflation makes the cheese world, it's like an area where people are really struggling if you get right down to it. From cheese shops to cheese makers, it's just more expensive to produce quality products and to work with animals and to have good labor. So definitely there is a stress on the system. But like I said, I feel like the curiosity of the average consumer is starting to open. And you've got things like cheese tourism and cheese conferences and cheese festivals that seem to me more robust than ever.
And as we start to explore these things, you had talked about somewhere cheese personality, finding your cheese style. And I had heard that you are a self-declared stinkers and blues girl. Could you explain what that means and how we might all find our own? I'm a big washed rind, so I guess that's a stinker kind of girl. But can you talk about what that means and how we might all explore our own cheese personalities?
Sure. I'm delighted to hear that you love wash rinds. A lot of times people don't know what a wash rind is, but that is a cheese. It's a little bit stinky because it's had a little sponge bath, usually with some salt water or maybe a boozy solution to kind of create this orange crust on the surface of the cheese. And I'm always amazed how many people I meet who say like, I love stinky cheese. And they often will say it, sort of hiding their face a little bit as if it's this like terrible confession. But I think, no. I mean, those cheeses were created by monastic communities who had taken a vow of poverty and made really bold cheeses to replace meat in their diet. And so I think we're attracted to those cheeses because they remind us of some of the meaty flavors that we love. You can get great wash rind cheeses that will make you think of beef stew or even make you think of like a cheeseburger sometimes. So some of it is just going in, sniffing around literally and tasting things, right? But all it takes is one bite of something like Red Hawk from California, a great stinky cheese, or the great French cheese Époisse, which is so strong, supposedly it's illegal to carry on French drains. If you like those cheeses, then you are a wash rind girl or a wash rind lover, right? And now you speak the language of wash rinds. And that's another thing you can talk to a cheesemonger about at the counter. Just say like, I love stinky cheese. And they'll be like, oh, I feel you. Come down to this part of the case, So I love wash rinds just like you. I think they're strong, interesting. They're usually very creamy and moist. And they just have a lot of personality. They're also just, in the United States, I think, an unusual number of great wash rind cheeses. There's one coming out of Connecticut called Hooligan. I mean, they often have great names too. Ooh. That I just love. It's wildly stinky. Made by a mother and a son at Cato Corner Farm in Connecticut. So Hooligan, if you like your wash rinds. And then I also love blue cheeses. I don't know how you feel about them, Catherine, but
I do like them in smaller amounts. I usually with some fruit or preserves, like if I have an excuse to drink port. But yes, I do like a blue cheese.
Sometimes I think also, like especially at the end of a meal, if you have just a little piece of blue cheese, you feel like you're having this nice treat. You don't need a lot of it. A little hunk of blue cheese, some port, like you say, piece of dark chocolate, a date, a fig. It's like this wonderful, it can be this wonderful sweet, salty combination. And I think there are just so many interesting kinds of blue cheeses. That's what really got me hooked. It's like, oh, the Italians have Gorgonzola, the Brits have Stilton, which is so good. The French have Roquefort. And these cultures are really proud of these blue cheeses. So I spent a whole summer, which I call my blue cheese summer, just eating blue cheese because I was like, I want to taste these and I want to understand them. Again, if you're blue cheese curious, maybe you don't want anything too intense, talk to a cheesemonger and just say, I'm inching my way into the blues. So can you like guide me softly? Start with a gorgonzola dolce or something like that. That's like really easy and friendly. So, technically there are about 7 styles of cheese, although there aren't any hard and fast rules. And so, you can start with your creamy soft cheeses. You can start with your harder cheeses. I don't think it really matters where you begin. Just like find a style you like and start to explore it and then expand.
I mean, you alluded to it earlier, but I do think the best way to do that in many ways is to go to your cheesemonger and do try 3 different blues at once and just understanding, when it's aged differently, if it's from this different place. One of my favorite wine guys is Stephen Muse, who works at Formaggio Kitchen now, actually, after many years in journalism. And he would always say, you have to open a bottle of wine and then you have to drink it the day you open it, and you should drink it the day after you open it. And you also need to have at least a couple bottles going at the same time so you can be comparing these different styles. Really tough homework, Stephen. But it's very similar with cheese. Like if I'm at a party, I want maybe not 11 blue cheeses or even 2 blue cheeses. But if you're approaching it with a really like curious, studious lens, I think going deep on one style and tasting those nuances, I think is a great way to educate yourself and learn.
Yeah, I mean, talk about how to focus a busy brain. Catherine, I love to do something like, let's say I am having a party for a friend, it's their birthday. I'll find out, okay, what is your favorite cheese? Maybe it's brie, maybe it's cheddar style cheeses. And then I'll just tell everyone, okay, everyone bring a variation on a brie or a cheddar. And we lay them all out on a long board in the center of the table, provide pairings, label everything, and then let everybody just taste. And you wouldn't believe, first of all, it's so much fun. And people go bananas like, oh my gosh, it's a night of the living cheddars, or it's death by brie, or whatever we're calling this party, right? And I get a chance to try this thing that I love, but like see like what a spectrum there is out there. And I'll pass out note cards if it's a geeky crowd, and we'll write up our notes as we're tasting them. And you get to really try all sorts of different pairings then. Like with cheddar, it would be fun to put out, you put out a little red wine, you put out a little white wine, you put out some whiskey, you put out some scotch, you put out some port, you break out their chartreuse. I don't care. You start pulling things from your cabinets, from your wet bar, and just play around and see what's good together. And that's how you find really interesting combinations. And I find that once I do that, people then they want to do it again. They're like, let's choose another thing. Let's choose Alpines next time. Let's choose blues. One night I did a blue cheese and Black Sabbath party, and it was like, bring your heavy metal records and bring your strongest blue cheese and let us all go really weird. And that was so fun. I still run into people who are like, I'll never forget that blue cheese and Black Sabbath party. I love heavy metal, but I didn't know I love blue cheese too. So just focusing on one style and really spending a night enjoying it and talking to your friends about it. To me, that is a blast. I'm a curd nerd, so like I just love to go there. But I find sometimes that's more fun and more productive than a board with 9 cheeses that nobody recognizes and no one remembers, 2 days later. That if they've eaten a whole board of blue cheese, they will remember, wow, I loved Basayo blue, or wow, I loved Colton Bassett Stilton. They'll remember that one cheese that spoke to them.
That is such a fun idea. And while we're on the subject of focusing, I'm going to take us right into the busy brain section of the podcast. So we haven't talked too much about cooking, although in my mind, just eating cheese is cooking. I did see you had a video about serving like époisse as a main meal, essentially. And then you have like, this is your main, and then you've got your veggies over here and a loaf of bread, and like cheese can be dinner, right? I think we need to give everyone permission to have cheese as dinner.
100%. That it is usually dinner in my house. So thanks for the endorsement.
Anytime. But the busy brain section of the podcast is, of course, where we ask 2 questions. And the first is, what sparks creativity for you in the kitchen?
I would say it used to be the wet bar when I was really working actively on a bunch of cocktail books with my brother. We just had these incredible wet bars for those projects. And so I would always be digging out like, what goes with Fernet Branca? But these days I would say it's probably more spices I've been in a real tagine phase. So I got one of those tagine cook pots. And it was from going to Marseille in France and eating amazing tagines. And I realized I love this flavor profile. I love a little bit of spice. I love paprika. I love fruit and meats together, like chicken and dates or chicken and lemon or things like that. And so I've been making a lot of tagines lately, and that has been like filling my life with joy. Like a tagine with a beautiful cheese board after, perfect night.
That sounds heavenly. Where do you get your recipes for tagines? Or are you just sort of making it up?
I have a Moroccan cookbook with recipes, and I use the New York Times sometimes recipes. But honestly, the tagine I bought, the tagine pot that my mom got for me, it is cast iron on the bottom, so you can get a nice little sear on whatever you're cooking, and then it has a clay top, and I just do it on the stovetop. And that came with one tagine recipe that I've just made 1,000 times with various variations. Always starting with like a broth, like a chicken broth or chicken stock, adding some, a can of tomatoes, the spices, and then throwing in from there vegetables, chicken, dried fruit. Sometimes it's vegetarian. But I have yet to make a bad one. And it's one where you don't have to really follow the recipe to a T.
Well, I'm now craving tagine. It's been a minute since I've had any of that delicious, spiced, warming. It's very cold today in Boston. So.
Yes. So great for this time of year.
And then the second question is, what do you do to calm the chaos? And that can be physical chaos or mental chaos, but we often need to kind of quiet our minds to be able to get in the kitchen and actually execute on dinner.
That's so true. That's so true. To quiet my mind, it's funny. My first thought was like meditation, but that doesn't always like quiet my mind, although I've been in sort of a period of doing about 15 minutes of meditation a day, or just like trying to create some pauses in a busy life, right? So not just going straight from the computer to cooking, to doing this, to doing that, but trying to like have some breaks and like have a 10-minute just sit and have that nice like pause. But I usually find that very difficult. It doesn't quiet my brain. It often makes me realize how fast it's thinking. But the one thing that has brought me so much focus since the pandemic is studying French. And it came from reading an article in the New York Times during the pandemic that just said, now is the perfect time to return to a language that you maybe dropped, and to like just give yourself some mental focus and push everything aside. So I do about an hour of French studying a day. It's a podcast, or I downloaded some classes, or I just memorize vocabulary. And I find, Catherine, that it demands all of my attention to retain French and to speak it and to remember where to put the accent and the S's. And at the end of a half an hour, 45 minutes of French, I feel completely relaxed and focused. Sometimes a little frustrated too, but often with a lot of joy. Like I've spoken in this secret code, and I can see a little bit of progress, from one month to the next, and just really devoting myself to one thing instead of multitasking, which is something that, I tend to do. With French, I can't multitask. The phone has to be off in another room. I can't be doing anything else. My brain has to go all into this like one space. And so I found that to be strangely centering. And it's probably why when I decided to take a year off to just do some writing, I thought, France, I'm just going to go and really work on studying French for a while, because it's something I love and didn't realize how much I would love. And I dream of one day writing a book on French.
And if we do that, Tenaya, maybe we will just end up, living in France and writing about cheese, and I could take us down a really wonderful path.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I sort of think, you have to find a thing you're passionate about, and that will then bring the focus. For me, it's been cheese, language study. I know you have your world of food, your world of writing, even like the book you're working on. I imagine like when you're working on something like that, a project like that takes months, it requires all your focus.
Yes, my husband reminds me every day.
Yeah. Do you find after you've written that you feel more focused and relaxed?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's like giving my brain a good scrub. I know a lot of people say they don't enjoy writing. I actually love writing. It's very hard for me to get myself to sit down and do it, but it does. It feels like my brain has been scrubbed. Not totally different than like if you have a good cry or a hard workout. I feel like it's a very similar sensation for me, but really helpful.
I love that. I've never made that correlation, but you're absolutely right. I woke up really early at 6 a.m. this morning, and I did about 4 hours of writing without really even intending to. I just felt like there was something I wanted to work on. Suddenly it was 10 o'clock. And just like you're describing, I felt amazing afterwards. And I thought, why am I not doing that every morning? Because yeah, like you said, like a good cry or a workout, you feel invigorated and yet calm.
Yeah, it's wonderful. May we all sit down and put pen to paper like we mean to.
I was just gonna say, and do you handwrite?
I do not handwrite. I can barely read that was more metaphorical, or I cannot read my own handwriting. I have terrible handwriting. It's really been a point of frustration since I was small. So I do not do that. But I'm trying to be more consistent with my writing practice, which it's a constant struggle, but having a book deadline is helping. It is helping a little bit.
Absolutely. Good luck with that. I look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying the process. It's something I wanted to do for a very long time. And speaking of books, I was going to say, before we let you go, can you please tell us where we can find you and your writing and your books, particularly Adventures in Cheese, for everyone who's now craving it after this conversation?
Well, if it looks like this funny little yellow and red book, it's available wherever books are sold. So online, in bookstores. I have a website, madamefromage.net. I'm also on Instagram at MME Fromage, short for Madame Fromage. So you can find me in those spaces pretty regularly.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much for your time today and all of your insight on the glorious world of cheese. I feel like there was a time in my life that I spent a lot of time thinking about cheese and doing pairings, and it just sort of got away from me. And this has really reinvigorated me. I'm excited to kind of dive back in a little more seriously to my cheese studies. So,
excellent.
Everyone will enjoy this, and of course, follow you along on Instagram and check out your book. So thank you so much, and look forward to chatting about cheese again sometime soon, I hope.
It was great chatting to another cheese lover. And one day I want to hear all about your time at Formaggio Kitchen. It's a great shop.
Yes, I've got lots of stories. Actually, last thing about Formaggio, do you know the latest on Formaggio? It's like such a beautiful story about the ownership.
I know that, yeah, a woman who worked there forever bought it.
So Julia Holman and I started working there almost the exact same time in 2008. She was working behind the cookie counter, was so kind to me. I was a prepared foods cook, just one of the sweetest, so hardworking, so curious. And as happens in a shop like that, people sort of come and go and start their own things. And Julia stayed. And I'd always sort of wondered, I wonder what Julia's plan is here. She was managing the stores and doing really well there. But I was always sort of curious. And then when I heard that Isan had sold her the shop, I just thought it was the most perfect story. She's like, and as she says, she's like, I really feel like a steward of this place more than anything else. And the shop is thriving. I was there for the holidays, which is the most insane time to be a cheesemonger, as you know, and happy to see that it's doing well. But if you're ever in Boston, we should meet up at Formaggio.
Absolutely. We'll meet up and we'll eat some stinky cheese.
Well, Tenaya, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I am now starving, and I'm going to try that dirty martini and pecorino pairing tonight. I am going to text my girlfriends as soon as we are done here and get that organized.
Thanks again. Cheers.
And you, thank you for taking the time to be here. And I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tenaya, aka Madame Fromage. And I can't wait to hear what your cheese personality is. Do you also love stinky wash-drying cheeses? I have to say Taleggio is one of my favorites. Or are you more of a fresh and grassy goat person? Let me know. Before we go, I need to ask you for one thing that would mean so much to me in the show. Please go to my website, catherinesmart.com, to keep in touch, subscribe to my newsletter, and follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like this episode, I'd love for you to share it with a cheese-loving, busy-brained friend. Thanks so much. I'll see you guys next time.
This could happen to you. This could happen to you. This could